So Bob got interested in the history of the many dairies in Albuquerque, and he'll tell you why Bezemek kind of rose to the top as one he wanted to start on. And so Bob, come on up, or you can stand wherever you want to stand.
Okay, everybody, how's the volume? Can you hear? Okay.
Yes.
Alrighty. Well, who the heck was Bezemek? A few years ago, I started researching the Farmers Cooperative Market Association. That was started in 1938 as a New Deal project. And I ran across that in Charles Beeble's fascinating little book, Making the Most of It, Public Works in Albuquerque During the Great Depression. Thanks. This is my son-in-law and able assistant, Matt Crichton, who put this show together for me. And without him, there would have been no show. So anyway, the farmers market, as it turned out, James Bezemek was one of the directors. And then researching that, I found out he had a dairy. So that's what led to my interest in Bezemek. Bezemek Avenue, as you can see here at the corner of 7th Street in the North Valley, is only 1 block long. It runs from 6th to 7th Street. James Bezemek was probably the most prominent local politician you've never heard of. He was born on August 20th, 1873, near Tyre, Michigan.
You probably need to point it at the computer, don't you think? Oh.
It helps to turn it on. Right there, not too far from Bad Axe, which they should have visited Grindstone City. But anyway, he left Michigan as a young man and came to Albuquerque. We don't really know why. I've been told by his family that they think it was for his health. He either had asthma or TB, as was the case of so many immigrants to Albuquerque at that time. I think I'm going to suggest to the city of Albuquerque that they put up a monument to the tuberculosis bacterium. I think really Albuquerque owes a great debt of gratitude to the TB bacterium. We should have a monument to that organism. Anyway, Bezemek's father, Jacob Bezemek, came from the area of Bujovice, which is now in the Czech Republic. It's about 80 miles south of Prague, and settled as a farmer in Michigan. James came here in either 1896 or 1898. According to an article in the Albuquerque Journal when he retired, it said he started his dairy in 1898 with 8 cows. Wow. So his wife, or let me go to this next one here, the census. There's Jacob Bezemek, his wife Fanny, and James, Albert, and I think that's Frank, from the 1880 census in Michigan. Fanny was from England. Don't know how they met, but I don't know if you can see it, they misspelled the last name Bezemek, B-E-S-M-A-C-K. This is a common problem when you're doing genealogical research. It's a real headache. In those days, a lot of people didn't know how to spell their names. Many people were illiterate. The rules for spelling were not as rigid as they are now. There were sometimes 2 or 3 alternate ways to spell a word, which were all perfectly acceptable. So,
would you like us to click it for you so you don't have to maneuver that, Bob?
let me try this. In any case, if a census taker came to your door and he wasn't familiar with your name, he might ask you how to spell it, and if you didn't know how, he'd take a wild guess, which is evidently what happened here. James's wife was Mary Frances McKnight from Ohio, and you can see her name right here. And this is the 1900 census. She was working as an employee of the Athens State Hospital in Ohio. All these people on this page are employees, and they're all living at the hospital. So I don't know what kind of hospital that was. It might have been a TB sanitarium or something like that. But she was working in the ironing room. And as I said, this was the 1900 census. That's the year she came to Albuquerque, so she wasn't there very long. The Bezemek granddaughters have told me that they think that James and Mary met on the train to Albuquerque, and they thought that maybe she was a Harvey girl. But as you can see from the 1901 Albuquerque City Directory, she was an employee of the Albuquerque Steam Laundry, which kind of ties in with her employment as an ironing person at the Athens State Hospital. There's the 1901 advertisement for the Albuquerque Steam Laundry. She's probably in that picture, but it's such a poor quality picture, and I only have one other picture I've ever seen of Mary, and so I can't identify her there. James and Mary were wedded by the Justice of the Peace in Bernalillo County, February 6, 1902, and again the name is misspelled, this time Bezemek, because the court clerk filled it out. I had a heck of a time finding this because at first I went online and used the county clerk's online lookup and couldn't find it. So I went down to the county clerk's office, and thank God for Arthur Dow. He's a very helpful person down there. He looked it up on his computer, and just by going through the B's, he was able to find it. The next reference that I've been able to find to James is this 1905 article in the Albuquerque Evening Citizen, where the city chemist was beginning an inspection tour of the dairies. And you can see here there are only 4. There were probably some others, but in those days there were very few dairies. There were at least 30 or 40 saloons in Albuquerque at that time. So the beverage of choice in Albuquerque was not milk, it was whiskey. But at any rate, city chemist John Weinzierl was one of the original faculty members at UNM. He was a professor of chemistry. Next article, 1906, he's appointed executor of a will for a Mr. George Walter. So at this point he's been in Albuquerque about 10 years and has risen to some measure of esteem among the local population if he's going to get appointed to be an executor of somebody's will. Here's his first listing in the Albuquerque City Directory, 1907. There was no business section that year, so he's just listed in the alphabetical section. Bezemek's Jersey Dairy, 1902 North 4th Street. This is the 1908 directory with a classified business section, and you can see the dairies there, and some of those are well-known, French's and Matthew Albers. Again, the address is 1902 North 4th Street. Now here's a puzzle. This drove me nuts for over a year. 1902 was on the east side of the street. Bezemek's house and dairy were always on the west side. I thought, how could he get a number like 1902? Did they only deliver mail on the east side of the street and he had to have a mailbox over there, or what was it? Here's the answer. This is a Sanborn insurance map, thanks to Eileen O'Connell in the Special Collections Library. And I should mention that Joe was formerly the head librarian of the Special Collections Library. Librarians are the most helpful people in the world, believe me. This world would fall apart without librarians. Anyway, this is the 1931 Sanborn insurance map. Here's the Bezemek Creamery, as it's called. Let me get on this side. Here's McKnight Avenue, 4th Street. The small numbers are the original numbers. You can see it was 1902. This one is, I can't read it, 1904 maybe. Anyway, it was renumbered at some point, 1901, as it should be. So it was just incorrectly numbered from the beginning. Maybe, I don't know, in those days they may not have had rules when Albuquerque was first incorporated about east side being even and west side being odd, I don't know. But in later years, his address was 2003. He never moved. And by the way, this little octagon-shaped building here, this was Parker's Curio Shop, which we'll have more to say about later. I think it was supposed to look like a Navajo hogan. Okay, here's a revised 1931 Sanborn map. They have 2 of these in the Special Collections Library. the original version that I just showed you, and this one, which has a revision pasted in on the page. Instead of mailing you a whole new map every year, because these things are huge, they're the size of a coffee tabletop, and they're hard bound. So they would mail you out these little paper revisions, which you could paste in on the page. There's the old number, 1901. Now it's 2001. The reason for that is that in 1935, Harding Avenue, which is now Hannett, was extended across 4th Street. So it cut the 1800 block into two. So the north end of the 1800 block became the 1900 block, and the 1900 block became the 2000 block. So mystery solved. Bezemek told the newspaper when he retired that he bought his first piece of dairy land in 1902, but the first deed I've been able to find is this one from May 9th, 1903. He bought a piece of land from Mr. and Mrs. Era Inglesby for $600, a lot of money in those days. Nobody knows if he came out here with money in his pocket. Did he borrow money from his family? Did he work for a few years and save up his money? How did he do it? I don't know. But that's a lot of money. The piece of land was 1,086 feet east to west and 170 feet north to south, fronting on 4th Street. And fortunately, this deed has been copied in a typewritten version because all the other deeds from this period are handwritten, and they're darn near impossible to read. This is a microfilm copy from the county clerk's office. This is a 1927 Conservancy District map. The Conservancy District was formed in 1925, and of course they needed maps to determine how much property each farmer had that was going to get water from the ditches and how much they would assess him in fees. And so they made these very nice maps which show properties with the landowners' names and show all the buildings and everything. And we have Rick here from the Conservancy District. Where are you, Rick? There he is. He's helped me a lot getting these maps. But you can see that Bezemek's land eventually stretched from what is now Haynes. This is Haynes Avenue now. Here's the railroad spur to the sawmill, to Indian School Road, and from 4th Street to the Indian School over at 8th Street. He bought a piece of land from after the original one from the Inglesbys. He bought a couple of acres from Andrea Perea de Garcia in 1907. He bought 9/400ths of an acre from George, the name escapes me at the moment, and then another 3 acres from Perea de Garcia, which gave him all this land here. In 1909, he bought a piece of land north of Indian School and east of 4th Street, 10 acres there from Angela Giannini, who was probably the ancestor of my dentist. But anyway, here's 4th Street. Here's his house. Some of these you probably can't read them from here, from where you're sitting, but this says cow barn. Some of these are labeled with a B, which I think means barn. This is a photo of the house. James and Mary are standing there in front of the water tank. This little building over here is the milking shed. It's a very ornate brick house. I've never seen anything in Albuquerque like this. Very ornate brick parapet there, and I asked Professor Chris Wilson at UNM, what style is this? Is that Gothic? Is it Italianate? What is it? And he said it could be anything. He said it was common in those days for bricklayers to duplicate wood trim and brick. And so it could just be a bricklayer's fantasy. But the house, unfortunately, is no longer there.
Do you know when it was demolished?
Probably in the late 40s. Yeah. This is what replaced it. This is a terrible tragedy. That's McKnight Avenue coming into 4th Street there. That's the Xeon Sign Company, and that's their storage yard. And further down the street is Weck's Restaurant. That's, as with the Alvarado Hotel and the Franciscan Hotel and so many other Albuquerque landmarks, it was tragically demolished. This photo of James delivering milk was probably taken by his father Jacob when Jacob came out to visit him in 1908. You can see someone probably back home in Michigan has written across the bottom, James Bezemek delivering milk in Mexico. Some things never change. They still think we're part of Mexico. The building in the background, there's a sign in front of it, and I know you can't read it on the 8x10 original. I can read it with a magnifying glass. It says Tony Ortiz, blacksmith and horseshoeing especially. Tony Ortiz's blacksmith shop was at 311 North 1st Street, the corner of 1st and Tijeras, which puts this house in the 200 block on 1st Street, but I haven't been able to find out whose house it was. These photos were sent to a genealogy researcher in Belen named Early Gardner, who I ran into on the internet. And Early and my wife and I met Marcy Bezemek Farmer one day out at Fairview Cemetery and looked at the family graves, and then we went out and had lunch, and that was an interesting meeting. But Early got these photos from Jennifer Bezemek in Detroit. And I've tried to get a hold of Jennifer, but she unfortunately hasn't responded to me. Here's the newspaper article about Mr. and Mrs. Bezemek's visit, and this is from August 8th, 1908, the Albuquerque Citizen. And it says they'll spend several months as guests at the home of their son, James Bezemek. There is no such place as Lice, Michigan. I contacted a geography professor at Michigan State, and he looked it up for me. He thinks that's just a typographical error for tire, because the Y and the E are in the same place they would be for the name tire. Okay, this is going back to that photo of the Bezemek delivering milk, the 1920 directory ad for Tony Ortiz. You can see it says blacksmithing and horseshoeing, automobile spring and body maker now. So he's trying to keep up with changing times. This is Bezemek milkman, very formally attired there in a suit, Orlando Bettis, and his three of his kids. Orlando came here from Tennessee in 1910. In the 1912 directory, he and his wife were listed as living on South Edith and operating a grocery store on South Walter. He began delivering milk for Bezemek in 1913. These are his children, Earl, Viola, and Nell. This photo was probably taken about 1910. I think Earl was born in 1904. And look at that clothing. That is just outrageous. Probably drove their mother nuts on laundry day. Nell, the one on the right, is the grandmother of Mark Wilson, who I also found on the internet. Mark used to live here, but unfortunately he just recently moved to Washington State. But he identified these people for me. And notice the wagon in the back. It says E.H. Becker. E.H. Becker owned the Albuquerque Dairy, which was 1 block north of Bezemek's Dairy on 4th Street. And you can see there's 2 milk cans here, but look closely. Each milk can has a spigot. He was still selling milk in bulk. Bring your own container and we'll fill it up. Sorry this photo isn't very clear. It doesn't reproduce very well on the copier, but this is James filling milk bottles by hand, probably in that milk shed I showed you earlier. That's no doubt Mary on the right. I think this is his oldest son, Marvin, on the left. He had 2 sons, Marvin and James, and from later photographs of them, I'd say it looks more like Marvin than it does James. And apparently they poured the milk into this container on the top, and it dripped down through, I guess, a cheesecloth strainer into this barrel, which has a spigot on it, and you fill the milk bottles up one by one. No automation in 1910. The dairy operation was probably strictly a family operation in those years. Probably Mary and James milked the cows, fed the cows, cleaned the barns, herded them back and forth to the pasture, washed the bottles, filled the bottles, delivered the milk. A sun up to a sundown job, 7 days a week. Fast forward a little bit to 1921. The war had just ended. During the war, the government was making a lot of purchases, obviously. The business was good. Full employment, no unemployment in wartime. Then the war ends, the government stops purchasing. The troops come home trying to find work. The country goes into a very, very bad recession. It lasted a year or more. People were getting laid off. Wages for everybody were being cut, but prices remained high. So the Women's Club decided to do something about it and investigated the cost of milk in Albuquerque and surrounding communities and the cost of supplies. You can see alfalfa cost $42 a ton at one period during the war. Today it is $28 a ton. So they went and called upon the dairymen and didn't get any satisfaction. And apparently that article was from the April 14th, 1921 journal, or the 16th. This ad by the dairymen ran in the April 14th Evening Herald. And they're telling the citizens that they had to buy their supplies months earlier when they were plentiful. And prices were much higher then. So it says until the new feed supply becomes available at new prices that are materially lower, local dairymen cannot reduce their feeding costs. And on the 16th, they ran this ad saying that the cost of bottles and bottle caps had risen, insurance and taxes had risen, wages were about the same. And it says most local dairymen are just barely, making a living. There are 60 licensed dairymen in the milk producing business in and around the city. Can you recall any of them who have earned more than a livelihood out of the business? You cannot. But you can recall several who have gone broke. Well, the Women's Club wasn't buying that argument. They started a boycott, and they circulated a petition for women to sign saying they would not buy milk from local dairies until the price was lowered, and they urged women to use canned milk or powdered milk. Then they imported milk from Colorado by rail and sold it in bulk at Bracey's Cafeteria downtown for 15 cents a quart, which was the price they were trying to get the dairies to lower their milk to. And eventually James Bezemek announced that effective June 1st he would lower his price to 18 cents a quart. There are some other articles in here which I didn't have time to show you, that the newly formed Albuquerque Cooperative Dairy Association, they had called on them, and the president, C.H. Chris, said maybe they would be able to sell at a lower price, but they weren't sure. It would just depend on the cost of feed at the time. So I don't know what the resolution of this argument was. I haven't been able to find any newspaper articles subsequent to this. But I assume that the boycott ended and people went back to buying local milk. And speaking of the ADA, as it was known, here's an announcement from January 1921 in the paper that the Albuquerque Dairymen's Cooperative Association is going to be incorporated. Board of Directors, C.H. Christ, Fred Mann, J.P. Jacobson, J.I. Phillips, and J.S. Bowers, all prominent local dairymen. They decided to build a milk processing plant at Grand Avenue and 2nd Street, right next to City Hall. Here is their first advertisement in the 1921 a city directory right above Matthew Dairies, which was a well-established local dairy by then. And notice the phone number, 351. That was Bezemek's phone number. And the reason for that, oh, here's a typical newspaper ad from that time. The reason for that, here's the newspaper article inviting the public to come tour the plant for their grand opening in July of 1921. J.A. Bezemek is general manager of the plant. He got hired to get them off the ground. But now, here's January 1922, and he's running an ad in the newspaper. We are now prepared to deliver pure and fresh milk and cream of our own production to all parts of the city. Bezemek's Dairy. New phone number, 1046. That would remain his phone number until the dairy closed. I don't know if he had just agreed to go to work for the ADA for a few months to get them going, and then would return to his own business, or if he got into an argument with them or he got fired. But at any rate, he left the ADA and went back to operating his own dairy. In 1923, he ran this ad in the city directory. In addition to his dairy, he's got a retail store at 401 West Central called the Butter Shop. He operated that until 1928. And there's the ad for the ADA and Matthews Dairy. They always had an ad in the directory every year. We're going to go through these next ones pretty quickly because time is short. James was involved in all kinds of local organizations and causes which would improve the lot of farmers. And here's on this one, he's the vice president of the Reclamation Association. They're trying to get some changes in the Conservancy Act. They submitted a bill to amend the 1913 Conservancy Act to the New Mexico House, and it apparently got the results they desired because the new Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District was formed in 1925. That's the year this was going on. Member of the Board of County Commissioners had a diseased kidney removed at the Mayo Clinic. And Chairman Frank Butt also went to the Mayo Clinic at the same time for an operation which brought the wheels of government in Bernalillo County to a standstill for a few weeks. This is where it reveals that minutes of the meeting disclosed that James Bezemek had been elected chairman of the board of the county commission. That was 1935. President of the Bernalillo County Dairymen's Association. Vice president of the newly formed Middle Rio Grande Farm and Livestock Bureau. Here he's appointed to a vacancy on the Conservancy District Board by District Judge Thomas Mabry, later to be Governor Mabry. This is interesting because it reveals a little bit about how Clyde Tingley operated. This is a city commission meeting. Bezemek was deeding land to the city to have 5th Street opened across his dairy land. In return, he was going to get the city to lay water and sewer lines to the Bezemek Housing Addition, which was on the north side of his property, Indian School Road, and in a new street which he created, McKnight Avenue, named for his wife. And Tingley sees the attorney for the owner of the local gas station next to Bezemek's property there at the meeting, and he tells him, we're putting the street through there. The attorney was there to object to that. The landowner was afraid it was going to disturb a pipeline to his property. And he claimed he had an easement from Bezemek, and Tingley says, he's already given us the easement on that, replied Daly. Well, he told us first, declared Tingley. You know, Jim needs a lot of water and sewer out there. He has a lot of land in that vicinity. If Bezemek doesn't sign, declared the chairman, we'll put the city limits around his part and let him sit out on the prairie. So in other words, it was a done deal. This was a backroom deal that had already been arranged, but according to Tingley, it was already in the minutes of the city commission, which was news to everybody who was there that night.
What's the year on that,
The year?
General?
1935 or 37, somewhere around there. No, it's a little earlier than that because Tingley would have been governor at that time. In 1930 something, we had a grasshopper infestation, and Bezemek invented a little machine he called the hopper dozer. It was an oil-filled trough on wheels which he towed behind his tractor to catch grasshoppers. And he's inviting everybody to come out Thursday afternoon at 2:30 and see the machine in operation. Said it gave better results than using poison. In 1938, his hay barn burned to the ground. He lost 2 tons of hay. Fire Chief Art Westerfeld is quoted as saying that the cause of the fire was a backfiring motor which started some cotton on fire. We're going to hear more about Westerfeld in a little bit. In 1938, James got lost overnight on a hunting trip to the Jemez. James was an avid hunter, and he got lost in a snowstorm on Sunday afternoon and didn't make it back to camp until Monday about noon. His hunting companion, William Parker, his neighbor, enlisted his son James and Leo Renault as the other members of the search party. And it said he suffered no ill effects from his experience except that he was, quote, very tired. There's Leo Renault on the right. He was a driver for Bezemek's Dairy starting in 1931. He first went to work for Bezemek in 1928 as the bookkeeper. He began driving in 1931 and stayed with Bezemek as a driver until the dairy closed in 1941. Leo then became a city fireman, retired as assistant chief in 1966. He died in 1991. In the middle is James's eldest son, Marvin. This is the house here on the left. 4th Street is behind the truck, and that building in the background on the right is the old King's Rest Motel on 4th Street, which in more recent years was called the Interstate Inn. It was torn down a few years ago. It's now an empty lot. Leo Renault was the son of Emile. These are 2 brothers, Emile and Gustave. They were French immigrants. Emile owned the Sawmill Saloon at Sawmill Road at 12th Street. And but you can see the city director gives the address SS, Southside Indian Road, 1W12, 1 west of 12th Street. Now why does the directory always said it was on Indian School Road? When I told that to Dawn Renault, she said, well, no, I think the saloon was on Sawmill Road. Well, you're right, Dawn. Here's why. Here's the 1924 Sanborn map. Here's the sawmill. Here's 12th Street. Here's the Sawmill Saloon. Here's Indian School Road. That is now Sawmill Road, Bellama Avenue, 8th Street. So sometime in the 1930s, they straightened Indian School Road out and changed the name of these streets. Emile ran afoul of the law, unfortunately. He got arrested in January 1919 for importing whiskey illegally into a dry state. Now, I had never heard of New Mexico being a dry state. National prohibition didn't start until 1920. But he was arrested for bringing in 100 half pints and 100 pints of whiskey, which he said was for his own personal use. He's a saloon owner, right?
As a remedy for asthma.
As a remedy for asthma. And when I saw that, I said, oh, come on, is this the best excuse you can think of? But later I found out that whiskey was widely prescribed by doctors as a remedy for asthma. Now, he was arrested for violation of the Reed Amendment. The Reed Amendment amended the Wade-Kenyon Act of 1913, which was a toothless law that forbade importation of alcoholic beverages into a dry state or a dry county. It had no provision for enforcement and no penalties. So the Reed Amendment provided for a $1,000 fine. It also superseded any local or state law which allowed personal use, because many states had enacted dry laws but still allowed you to bring alcohol in for your own personal use. In a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court just a few days before his arrest, the Supreme Court ruled that Congress did have the authority, under its power to regulate interstate commerce, to outlaw importation for personal use into a dry state. And so if it hadn't been for the Reed Amendment, Emil probably could have been acquitted. But you can see he was found guilty in federal court, fined $151 plus costs. That's a lot better than $1,000. And then, so that was the end of his saloon. His widow, he died a year later, his widow tried operating it as a grocery store, I think for another year or two, but she closed it up. And poor old Emil, he did die in 1920 in March, and guess what his death certificate says is the cause of death? Cardiac asthma. So, getting back to New Mexico, this is the constitutional amendment that made New Mexico a dry state, passed by the voters in 1917. And if you'll excuse me a minute, I'm going to get you the exact figures here. The vote was 28,732 for the amendment, 12,147 against. That's a little better than a 2-to-1 margin. When I heard that, it just boggled my mind. How could New Mexico, where whiskey was practically drunk for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, we're a state full of hard-drinking cowboys and miners and railroad men, how could New Mexico vote itself to go dry? It's amazing. And of course, when national prohibition was repealed in 1934, then New Mexico had to repeal its amendment. And it was so unpopular, it was even repealed in the Bible Belt rural counties of New Mexico. There's the vote totals from the Albuquerque Journal. Okay, getting back to the hunting, as I mentioned, Bezemek was an active hunter. That's him in the middle. And he and his buddies there were so proud of their success, they each got a deer, that they hired the Milner Studio to come out and take their photograph. This was probably taken on Bezemek's property. And it's interesting to me who his hunting companions were. That's Leo. This is John Givaudan, his cousin Gaston Givaudan, and this is somebody who's only given by his last name, Springer. There were two brothers in Old Town that had operated grocery stores by the name of Springer, and I think he's probably the son of one of them, but I don't really know. John and Gaston were sons of Joseph and Casimir Givaudan, who were French immigrants again. Came here about 1902. And they worked for a couple of years for the Santa Fe railway shops, and then they opened a meat market. Casimir eventually went his separate way, but Joseph operated the market at 1022 North 4th Street until the 1940s. Gaston and John both worked for Joseph. Gaston left in the 1920s and John left later. Gaston had worked in 1918 and 1919 for Schwartzman and With. You've all heard the name Schwartzman. Most of you probably remember Schwartzman Packing Company. Well, he started out in partnership with Alex With, a German immigrant. And Gaston worked for him for a couple of years as a driver. Well, guess what? Alex With Jr.'s daughter, Eleanor, married Marvin Bezemek. So there's a family connection there. And Bezemek might have had his hunting meat processed at Joseph Givaudan's butcher shop, I don't know. Joseph retired in the 1940s from the meat business and moved to a farm at the corner of 2nd Street and Candelaria, on the southeast corner, which is right around the corner from my house. And he lived there until his death in 1958. And there's a gentleman from my neighborhood, the Stronghurst neighborhood, named Richard Brunetto, who's a lifelong resident of our neighborhood. He remembers as a boy going over to the Givaudan farm with his family to buy chickens and rabbits. And my wife Vicky's older brother, Joe, remembers playing on that property as a kid. By that time they were no longer farming, but the barns were still there. And the Givaudan family is interesting, and I could go into a lot of detail about them, but I will mention that Gaston married Lena Masaglia. Her father was the president of the company that owned the Franciscan Hotel. And that's probably his oldest daughter, Laura. And she was, this photo I think was taken about 1928 or 29, because as I mentioned, Leo began working for Bezemek in 1928. And Laura, I think, was born about 1926, and she appears to be 2 or 3 years old in that photo. Another hunting photo, 1945, the year before James died. That's James on the right, his son-in-law Alex with, a man named George Treat, who I know nothing about, Marvin Bezemek, and Leo Renault, and a bunch of turkeys hanging on a line. And there's James with the turkeys again. And the interesting thing about this photo is that everybody else, wears standard hunting attire, and James goes hunting in an overcoat. Here's a 1937 photo with William Parker in the middle, the man who was with him on that trip in 1938 when he got lost. And Parker, I believe, was the owner of Parker's Curios, that little octagon-shaped building next to the Bezemek Dairy. Cecilia Claufley, who's another Bezemek granddaughter who lives in California, told me that she remembers as a little girl buying her first Christmas present for her mother at that curio shop. And that's Bezemek on the left and Leo on the right, somebody named Gennaro, who I don't know who that is. They took everything but the kitchen sink on their hunting trip. See, they got bed springs tied to the roof of the truck. They planned to live in comfort while they were in camp. Leo, in addition to being a fireman after the Bezemek Dairy closed, operated a grocery store at 504 West Indian School Road. And is that his daughter Mona, or is that his wife Clarice?
Clara,
Yes.
Clara's his wife.
That's his wife? Okay. There's Leo at work. Okay, now we're going to change gears again. In 1938, a group of farmers organized a farmers cooperative market association. The idea was to provide a central marketplace where farmers could bring their produce and meet with buyers from the local stores. They were complaining that the stores were buying most of their produce from out-of-state growers. So County Agent Frank Wayne kind of organized this thing. They had a bunch of meetings and decided to form this market. And you can see James Bezemek is one of the board members, and the president is a man named Alejandro Gonzalez, a Corrales farmer, who was known as the Celery King. Alejandro had inherited a small piece of land in Corrales from his father, and he was looking for something a little more profitable than pinto beans to grow. And one of the agricultural agents mentioned to him that celery would probably be a good crop for New Mexico, so he experimented with it and turned it into quite a good cash crop. And it was grown a lot differently from the way they grow it now. It was planted in the field, allowed to grow, and then transplanted into these deep trenches. The stiff outer stalks were taken off, and the bunches were transplanted into these trenches. They were covered with boards, and dirt was piled over the boards. And this was done to make the celery more tender and to bleach it. So it was very, very labor-intensive process. But he became famous for this, and it's so famous, in fact, that in 1924, he sent a gift of celery to President Coolidge for his Christmas dinner. So there's an article in, I think it's a 1935 or 1936 New Mexico magazine about this, which is pretty much the same thing as this article. This article is from 1925 from a journal called Farm and Ranch. And one of the librarians, Libby, who now was at the Special Collections Library, is now at Los Griegos, searched it for me and found this. The nearest one we could find was at the University of Texas Library in Austin. And they wanted $16 to mail me a copy, or to do an interlibrary loan. It cost the same amount. Fortunately, I have a sister-in-law in Austin. So I sent her to the library and she made this copy for me. But, and I apologize for the terminology. I think most of you realize that in the 1920s, most Hispanic Americans were referred to as Mexicans. Dan, I'm losing my microphone. Okay. Thank you. So, okay, can you hear me now? No? This isn't working either.
There.
Yes.
Try it. Are we good now? Yeah. Better? Okay. So yeah, this article was, in the terminology of the day, it's actually a pretty complimentary article by a man named Kyle Crichton. It'd be interesting to find out if he's related to the science fiction writer with the same last name. Here's a photo of a young Alejandro Gonzalez. This is from Mary Davis's book on Corrales. She's written one of those Arcadia books that you've seen, no doubt. And this is a 1910 portrait of Alejandro. Getting back to the farmer's market, here's the lease between the city and the market. It was approved in 1938, and it's interesting. You see, this is actually on a separate item on the agenda. These are from the city council minutes. The city manager, Charles Wells, the man for whom Wells Park is named, the terms of the lease follow here. It had to be a nonprofit organization. They had to hold the city free of any liability for anything that might happen on the property. They had to pay for all the utility bills. If the market failed to be operated for a period of more than 90 days, it would revert to the city. This property was where the main post office is now, at Mountain Road and Broadway. And you can see it's signed by Clyde Oden, ex officio mayor. The reason Clyde Oden was commission chairman was because Clyde Tingley was governor that year. Clyde Oden was the Buick dealer, later the Chevrolet dealer, predecessor of Ed Black Chevrolet. This is the cover of the December 1938 Albuquerque Progress magazine. The building was under construction. They hadn't poured the concrete floor yet. It's just an open metal shed. Gives the dimensions there, 165 feet by 35 feet. This is the opening day, grand opening luncheon. They had 150 invited guests. Here's a very young Clinton P. Anderson. He was chairman of the Chamber of Commerce Agricultural Committee. He got the chamber to donate $400 to the market for materials. There's James Bezemek, there's Alejandro Gonzalez, and on the right there's another photo of Alejandro. The market started out, they got off to a great start, lots of participation. They reported at the end of their first year that they sold $151,000 worth of produce. That sounds pretty good. In 1940, they built a refrigeration plant. By the way, this market The materials were paid for by the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, the RFC, with plus the $400 from the Chamber of Commerce. The RFC money was funneled through the Conservancy District. The Conservancy District advanced the money to the market out of one of their funds, and then it was repaid by the RFC. And then in 1940, they built this refrigeration plant so that farmers could leave unsold produce overnight. And that was also paid for by the WPA. However, things soon went downhill. The market was not even breaking even. They couldn't meet their expenses. And they kept getting advances every year from the Conservancy District. So in 1941, in January, they went to the Conservancy District and asked for more money. And the Conservancy Board said, well, maybe we ought to take over operation of the market. And it turned out that they ended up advancing the funds without doing that, but they did put several strings on the money. Meanwhile, Alejandro Gonzalez died in 1941, I think. He was 54 years old, lifelong resident of Corrales. It gives the survivors down there, one is a Mrs. Silva of Bernalillo. She's the mother of Rose and Annette Silva, who operate a pottery store in Bernalillo right next to the Range Cafe. In 1942, Bezemek was named president of the market. But in June of 1942, they announced the market was going to close for lack of participation. It says during the last 20 days, has averaged only 4 farmers per day. And the reason he gave was that because of the war, the farmers didn't need the market. They could sell all the produce they could raise directly to the stores. And of course, Kirtland Field out here was a big buyer of produce for the mess halls. So the farmers weren't participating. He said they hoped they could reopen after the war, but that never happened. Okay, I think we just ran out of battery. Okay, meanwhile, back at the dairy, in 1941, the residents of the Bezemek Addition, those 2 streets on the north side of the dairy property, began complaining to the city commission about odor and flies from the dairy. This is interesting because everybody knows the dairies stink. Why would you buy a house next to a dairy? And why would Bezemek start a residential housing addition next to a dairy? It doesn't make much sense, but anyway, I guess maybe people had stronger resistance to smells in those days. But they didn't get any satisfaction from the city. Go ahead. So they filed a lawsuit in district court to compel Bezemek to move the cows away from there. And he contested the lawsuit at first, but eventually decided, you know what, I'm getting old. It'd be nice to retire and enjoy life. I don't want to fight with these neighbors. So he sold the dairy to Creamland in 1941. And this is where it mentioned that he started the dairy in 1898 with 8 cows. He kept the land, 45 acres, and said he planned to attend to the real estate business and hunting and fishing. He had one more political office to run for. He got elected to county treasurer in 1942. And I thought about this, and you know, he was a 5-term county commissioner. He had once been a member of the Bernalillo County School Board. He had been on the Rio Grande Conservancy District Board. It wasn't like he needed another county political office to cap his career. You know, this was not the crowning achievement of his career. He hired his son Marvin as deputy county treasurer. We would look at that today as a very bad case of nepotism. Marvin had a college degree. I guess his degree was in accounting. Am I right? You know? So that was what he did after the war. So I think maybe James was trying to get Marvin started on a public career or a political career. He knew that Marvin was unknown to the voters, so he said, well, I'll run for treasurer, because James Bezemek had no background as an accountant. I'll run for treasurer, I'll hire my son, get him started in politics. But after, it was a 2-year term, and after his term was up, Marvin went back to work in the private sector and never did pursue a political career. The interesting thing, too, about this advertisement is it's not like they are today. With my opponent is a bum, he's done all these bad things, I'm going to straighten out his mess. No, it just says, I'm running for county treasurer, please vote for me. How simple can it be? His younger son, James, enlisted in the Army Corps of Engineers. He was in Sicily following the invasion there, and an Italian general walked up to him on a street corner one night and surrendered. So that made for some good copy for the Albuquerque Journal. Bolster morale back home. Unfortunately, we have to get to the sad part of this. In 1944, Mary died. And I do want to mention that, because we haven't talked about her much, but she was a very important part of the family in the dairy. And she was very active in all kinds of civic organizations, in church work, and she was in the, I don't know if it mentions here, the White Shrine of Jerusalem, whatever that is. Order of the Eastern Star, that's the women's auxiliary to the Masons. James was a Mason, he was also in the Kiwanis. All the dairy owners were very involved in local civic organizations. They probably all knew each other very well. All their wives were involved in these type of organizations, so they all associated with each other socially. C.H. Christ, who owned the Model Farm Dairy, which later became part of Valley Gold, married a daughter of one of the Blumenshines, the Blumenshine Dairy. Roy Campbell, who was the president of Creamland, his daughter married, name escapes me right now, the son of another dairy owner. So there was a lot of social interchange. But anyway, Mary was very active in these organizations. She was in the Red Cross, the Women's Auxiliary for the Veterans of Foreign Wars. She was in the, some kind of mother's auxiliary for the fraternity houses that her sons were enrolled in when they were at the UNM. And Cecilia Clawley has told me an interesting story about Mary. Mary was a Methodist, James was Catholic, and Cecilia says that this story was handed down to her by her mother. One day a Catholic priest came into the barn while Mary was wearing hip waders and mucking out the barn, and told her that the kids were going to go to hell if she didn't get them baptized in the Catholic Church. Mary chased him out of the barn with a broom. This must have been quite a sight. But I guess they let the kids choose whichever religion they wanted to join, because some became Catholic and some Protestant. Okay. James died in 1946. In Corpus Christi, Texas, it says he had gone there for his health. He died of a coronary thrombosis, and after that, pneumonia set in. Next one. And that's the announcement of his funeral. All the family were there. His son James was still in the Army in California at that point. And it mentions some of his accomplishments and organizations that he belonged to, and it said he was one of the originators of Highway 66. And I don't know exactly what they mean by that. The only newspaper article or anything that I've ever found which mentions that was in 1924. The governor appointed him to be a delegate to a national Good Roads Convention, which was held here in Albuquerque in 1924. So that may be a reference to that convention, or he may have had a bigger role in that, I don't know. I'm hoping to find out more about that, because I'm giving a talk in September at the Special Collections Library on Route 66 in New Mexico, so I've got to get some more information on that. So anyway, that's the end of the career of James Bezemek and family. I think it's interesting to note that James was a contemporary of Clyde Tingley. They both achieved high political office in New Mexico anyway. Tingley, of course, was mayor and governor. Bezemek, a 5-term county commissioner, member of the Conservancy District Board, school board member. I guess, everybody remembers Clyde Tingley. Very few people remember James Bezemek. The moral of that story is if you want your political career to be remembered in Albuquerque, don't run for the county commission, become mayor. Thank you. If you have any questions, or if you'd like to ask the Bezemeks or the Renaults any questions, I'll be happy to oblige. Yes, sir.
When you went out to Texas, had he already started selling the property here?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
When you retired, did he already start selling property here, or is that just subdivided after his death?
He had been selling property. That Bezemek addition that I mentioned was started in the late 1920s, and after he died, his property was further subdivided by the family. It's all commercial property now. There are still a few houses on Indian School in the 500 block and in the 500 and 600 block of McKnight Avenue. Any more questions? Joe,
Just
go ahead.
an addition about that saloon.
Yes.
That continued as a grocery, and the name of the family escapes me, but Charlie's Grocery is right at that site.
Wasn't Charlie's on the east side?
Yes.
Okay, the saloon was on the west side,
Okay.
the southwest corner.
Because there was a saloon associated with Charlie's.
Oh,
It was called the Swastika Saloon. We have advertisements for it.
uh-huh.
The owners of the Albuquerque Trolley are purchasing that property, and they are attempting to research whether or not there was a brothel immediately behind. There's 5 kind of rooms just east of the Charlie's Grocery that could have been.
Being next to the sawmill wouldn't surprise me.
But thank you for doing that Indian School Road piece, because there wouldn't have been a saloon allowed next to the Federal Indian School. So the fact that they changed it from the Indian School to Sawmill and then to Bellamose was really helpful about verifying that the saloon that was on Indian School really was where Charlie's, or across the street from where Charlie's is.
Yeah, and you look at old maps of Albuquerque and in the valley, almost every street has had its name changed at least once. All the streets in Old Town originally had different names. Mountain Road, where it now runs out here north of T-Way Park, that was Mountain Road originally ran on the south side of the park on what is now Old Town Road. And that road on the north side was Mann Road, named after Charlie Mann, I assume. And then west of Rio Grande Boulevard, what is now Mountain Road, was Perea Road. So there have been a lot of name changes on the streets in this area. Yes, sir.
Just regarding that same subject, I have a pamphlet. It was issued by I think it was Albuquerque National Bank. It gives all the street name changes. It was done in 1952. And that's when they did a massive reorganization of all the street names in Albuquerque, trying to link them up, make them more linear. And that's also when they instituted the quadrant system.
I need to introduce you to Judy Nickel.
It's in, I have that whole list in the book.
She has a wonderful little book
I've got it.
on Albuquerque
This
street
is a
names.
simple little pamphlet I found in one of these antique shops in town.
Okay, any more? Yes, sir.
Yeah, a couple of the newspaper articles looked like there was some redaction or they blacked out some. You know
That's from a website called Chronicling America. And they've since I copied those, they've fixed that problem. But when you would do a search on Chronicling America, you'd put in a keyword, you'd enter the state that you want or the locality and the time period that you want. You'd put in a keyword like dairy. It brings up all the newspaper articles for that period with the word dairy in them. Well, the word is highlighted in red on the computer screen. And when you printed it, it would be blacked out. Now they have a new way of printing it and it doesn't do that. That's a wonderful website, by the way, if any of you are interested in doing historical research. It's a tremendous resource. Go to Chronicling America, and it has the old Albuquerque newspapers, you know, from the 1880s to the 1920s. The other site is newspaperarchive.com, which some of you may have heard of, and that's a good one. There's a lot of gaps in it. There's a gap in the mid-1920s, there's a gap in the mid-1940s, and it only goes in Albuquerque. I use it down at the library because you can get it for free down there. Otherwise, you have to pay $25 or $30 a month to subscribe to it. But it ends in, 1978 or something like that for Albuquerque. Yes, sir?
Yeah, is there any way to get any history of these dairies? My parents had a dairy on Chavez Avenue, which was called Prairie Dairy. As a matter of fact, that's the way Chavez Avenue kind of got its name, because in those days it was a dirt road, and my father would call to have stuff, or I don't know how they got through, because I don't think they had any phones in those days, but they would have milk, not milk, but product for the dairy delivered, and they say, well, where do you live? Well, I'm on Chavez, on 4th Street someplace. Well, whereabouts? Well, why don't you put a sign up by the end of 4th Street and wherever you live, and we'll find you. So he would go up there on 4th Street and hang up a sign, Chavez, and partially that's why it became Chavez Avenue. Of course, there's a lot of Chavez's cousins and stuff like that that live on Chavez Avenue.
That was his
Is
name.
there any way to find out the history of these dairies? Because it was just a very small dairy.
It's very difficult. You have to do what I've done, is just go through these old newspaper articles and city directories. If you know a name, that makes it
Well, it was
easier.
Prairie Dairy, but when we were kids, I remember we used to have the caps that went on top of the bottles that had, I don't think the bottles themselves were labeled.
I think it's on Lynn's list. I think I saw a Prairie Dairy.
I don't have Prairie Dairy.
You don't have it?
No.
There were a lot of small dairies in Albuquerque over the years. You know, the big ones, you know, everybody remembers: Valley Gold, Creamland, the ADA, Matthew Dairy, Bezemek, Hicks Dairy. And I hope to, if you like this talk, I'll come back and do some more in the future. But you know, I hope to eventually tie those all together in some kind of a write-up, which will at least cover the history of the main dairies. But yeah, there were probably hundreds of small dairies. Yes, ma'am?
Were they connected to the meatpacking plant that was off Candelaria where the nature center is now?
Not that I know of. I wasn't even aware there was a meat packing. What was the name of it?
I don't know, but I understand that the reason Candelaria is so wide is because they used to drive cattle down it.
Oh, interesting. I don't know.
That's from the 19th century. Candelaria was a cluster of farm villages, and they take their cattle and graze them on the heights. Same for Griegos.
Yeah. So what started out as a cow path is now Candelaria Boulevard.
Multi-million-dollar houses.
Okay, shall we wrap it up? Where's Janet?
Bob, you mentioned George Treat, that you didn't know.
Yeah, I don't know who he is.
Okay, he was Clarence Reno's brother-in-law. Clarence had a sister, Irene, and George was her husband, and he was a seafarer, and he probably came for the Big Deer Hut.
Okay, did you all hear that? The gentleman that I mentioned in one of those hunting photos, George Treat, was Clara Renault's
Brother-in-law.
brother-in-law. Okay, and you said he was a seafarer. He was a merchant seaman, or
I don't know, he was
in the Navy?
in the
That would explain why he doesn't appear in any local phone books or city directories.
where the turtle came from.
Yes,
You
Judy?
mentioned a fellow named With. Was he tied with that With grocery store? That
Yes, I forgot to mention that. The With grocery store at 821 Mountain Road. It was originally started by Eugene With, and when he died, I guess they were brothers. Yeah, Alex took it over, and they lived at that house with the mansard roof at 815 Mountain Road. That was the With house.
And the door is at the corner.
Door to the grocery store?
Yeah, the door to the grocery store is at the corner, not to the east or the west or whatever. It was kitty cornered.
Yeah, the building is still there
Yeah.
at 7th Street and Mountain Road.
What's in there now?
I
An
don't know.
architectural office.
Oh, okay. Yeah, as I mentioned, the original With, Alex With, was a partner with George Schwartzman, and they had a meat market on Central Avenue, and then later on, Schwartzman bought that property way out on 2nd Street.
And With delivered, I understand.
What?
Someone told me that With would deliver groceries.
Yes, because Gaston Givaudan was a delivery driver for With. So, okay, I think that wraps it up. Thank you so much for coming.